Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. I never thought my life would lead here, staring at a phone screen glowing in the dark, my wife's betrayal laid bare in front of me. For years, I'd trusted her completely. We had it all, or so I thought, 2 kids, a house with a white picket fence, the whole image. I was so focused on maintaining that picture-perfect life that I hadn't noticed the cracks forming until it was nearly too late. It started subtly, a change in her, like she was becoming someone else overnight. The laughter that used to echo around our house turned brittle. She spent more time alone, scrolling on her phone, her face illuminated in a glow that shut me out. Conversations became scarce, and I convinced myself that it was just the weight of life. But it was more than that. I ignored my instincts until they started screaming at me. The day that would change everything began like any other, with no warning of the storm that was about to hit. We were supposed to meet some friends for dinner that night, a casual Friday evening. As I got ready, I noticed her phone on the kitchen counter, forgotten in her rush to get out the door and run some errands. A message notification popped up from someone named Liam. My heart jumped. This wasn't a name I recognized from her circle. I knew I shouldn't do it. I wanted to walk away, let it be. But then I thought about all the nights she'd stayed up late on that phone, the times she turned it away as soon as I walked into the room. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I unlocked it. I don't know what I expected to find, but what I saw unraveled everything. The messages were flirtatious, the kind that showed an intimacy far beyond friendship. There were plans, intimate dinners, hotels, secrets shared in the darkness while I was right there, oblivious in the next room. Each text I read felt like a punch, and I couldn't pull myself away, scrolling deeper and deeper, letting the anger and heartbreak settle into every corner of me. When she returned home, I couldn't look at her without seeing those messages. I thought about confronting her right then, but something inside me held back. I knew that anger alone wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan. I needed to know the whole truth. And above all, I needed proof. I had 2 kids who depended on me, a life that I wasn't willing to let her tear apart. If this was going to end, it would end on my terms. I watched her carefully over the next few days, playing the role of the oblivious husband. She kept up her routine, texting away with a smile, slipping out 4 work events that seemed to stretch longer than ever before. Each time she left, I felt my resolve hardening. I wasn't about to let her live this double life while I sat by in the dark. Finally, I reached out to a lawyer, someone a friend had recommended during a similar ordeal. We met in a quiet coffee shop where I laid everything out, not holding back on the details. My lawyer was sharp, her questions cutting straight to the heart of it. She assured me that if I could gather enough proof, we could handle this in a way that would leave me with primary custody, control of the house, and a shot at moving on without her shadow over my life. It felt like a lifeline. Armed with her guidance, I began building my case. I logged everything, saving every bit of evidence I could find. There were dinners she'd charged to a different card, hotel stays that lined up perfectly with her business trips. Each time I uncovered something new, it hurt like hell, but it also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't the woman I thought I'd married, it was a stranger who had taken her place. In the quiet moments, when the kids were in bed, I'd sit alone in our dimly lit living room, going over everything I'd gathered. It felt surreal, like a nightmare I was on the edge of waking up from, yet knowing I couldn't wake up. I was wide awake, and this was my reality. But the deeper I sank into it, the more focused I became. I realized that confronting her wasn't about shouting or making her feel guilty. That wasn't enough. I needed a clean break, a way to end this that wouldn't drag me down with her. Then, one night, I caught her sneaking in past midnight, a guilty smile playing on her face as she crept through the house, clearly hoping not to wake anyone. I sat in the darkness, unseen, my anger restrained behind a wall I had spent weeks building. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't know that I'd seen everything, that I'd uncovered every lie she'd told. That night was a turning point. I felt the last piece of my anger settle, solidifying into something colder and more determined. There would be no begging or pleading, no cries for explanations. I had all the answers I needed. The time for confrontation was coming. Over the next few weeks, I could feel the pieces of my plan falling into place. Each day, I put on a mask, hiding the turmoil that had taken over my life. I was living in a world where every interaction with her felt like a betrayal, yet I kept my demeanor calm, my routine unwavering. I had to. This was my life, and I wasn't about to let it unravel in front of our children. As the days passed, I continued to gather evidence. Her work events became increasingly frequent, each one aligning perfectly with new charges on our credit card or hotel reservations that she thought I'd never see. I installed a simple tracking app on her phone one night while she slept, the screen's glow casting an eerie light on her face. In another life, I might have hesitated, might have felt guilty about prying into her privacy. But that was before, back when I was still the trusting husband, blind to what was happening under his own roof. What I found through the app was even worse than I'd imagined. Her messages to Liam revealed a world of deception she had carefully crafted, one where I was a minor character, oblivious and discarded. They talked about meeting in hidden places, planning weekends in nearby cities. There were jokes about the bold ball and chain that stung with a new, raw bitterness. I saved everything, each piece adding weight to the case I was building. As the date of our anniversary neared, she grew more affectionate, an act I found almost laughable if it hadn't been so tragic. She'd put on a sweet smile, offer to make my favorite meals, and make an effort to spend time with the kids, painting herself as the devoted wife and mother. But her phone would always be close by, a lifeline to her double life that she guarded with an intensity I'd never noticed before. In one particularly ironic twist, she asked me to plan a weekend getaway to rekindle the romance. She spoke about how busy we'd been, how we needed to reconnect. I almost laughed, the absurdity of it all nearly choking me. Here she was, talking about rekindling something she'd already snuffed out. But I agreed, hiding the truth behind a smile and nodding along, telling her I'd make arrangements for us. What she didn't know was that I was already planning something else, something that would take her completely off guard. With the lawyer's help, I had drawn up divorce papers. We'd settled on a plan to file them immediately after I gathered the last pieces of evidence, ensuring that everything I wanted, custody of the kids, the house, financial control, would be granted. I had documents showing her expenses, messages proving her betrayal, and a paper trail that she couldn't refute. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was justice, an assurance that she wouldn't take everything from me in the aftermath of her lies. Then came the night when I decided to confront her, to lay it all out in the open. The kids were staying with my sister for the weekend, a small favor I'd asked under the guise of needing some alone time with my wife. It was late, and she came home from another work event, looking flushed and happy, a soft glow on her face that made my stomach turn. "Hey," she greeted me, barely meeting my eyes as she slipped her shoes off. "You're up late." I stood by the living room window, watching the darkened street outside. "Yeah," I replied, my voice steady, masking the storm raging inside me. "Just waiting for you." She gave me a small, dismissive smile and walked past, ready to disappear into the bedroom without a second thought. But I stopped her with one word, "Liam." The name dropped like a stone in a still pond, and she froze, her hand on the doorframe, her back to me. I watched as her shoulders tensed, the familiar charm and ease draining from her. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped closer, feeling my pulse hammering in my chest, but my voice remained calm, almost cold. "Liam," I repeated, watching her face as she turned to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fear. She tried to stammer out a denial, the excuses forming on her lips before she could even process what I'd said. But I didn't give her a chance to speak. "I know everything," I said, cutting her off. The messages, the hotels, all the work events you thought I wouldn't notice. I know about the lies you've been telling me, about the life you've been living behind my back. She stared at me, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words that just wouldn't come. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that there was no escape, no smooth lie to worm her way out of this. It's not what you think, she finally managed to say, her voice shaky. I was just lonely, okay? You've been so distant, always working, always busy with the kids. I needed someone to talk to. Someone to talk to. I repeated, my voice rising, barely able to contain the anger boiling over. Don't lie to me. This wasn't about talking, and you know it. She tried again, her voice trembling, the tears welling in her eyes. Please, it just happened. I didn't mean for any of this. You have to believe me. But I didn't have to believe her. I didn't have to do anything anymore. The weight of her deception settled over me, no longer the heavy burden it once was, but a clear, cold resolve. I wasn't here to argue or to beg for an apology. I was here to end it. You can stay here tonight, I told her, my voice hard. But tomorrow, I want you out of the house. I've already filed for divorce. I have the papers. You're going to sign them, and we're done. The look on her face was a mixture of desperation and disbelief. What about the kids? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The kids are staying with me, I said firmly. You lost the right to decide what's best for them the minute you decided to live a lie. She sank down onto the sofa, the reality settling in as she looked up at me, a tear slipping down her cheek. I felt no sympathy, only a hollow numbness where once there had been trust, love, and a lifetime of memories. That woman was gone, and all that remained was a stranger who had betrayed everything I had worked for. She tried to reach for me, to find some sliver of forgiveness. But I stepped back, putting a wall between us, one that could never be crossed again. You made your choice, I said, my voice as cold as the night outside. And now you have to live with it. The silence the next morning was a heavy, unbreakable thing. She was still there, seated at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, her fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. Her eyes were puffy and bloodshot, but I didn't feel even a sliver of sympathy. I had given her my ultimatum the night before, and I had meant every word. I placed the divorce papers on the table in front of her, my hands steady as I pushed them toward her. She looked up, her eyes pleading, but I was unmoved. It's time, I said simply, crossing my arms over my chest, standing firm in my resolve. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it, her shoulders slumping. There was no more fight left in her. It seemed that she finally understood that her excuses wouldn't change anything. Slowly, she took the pen I'd laid beside the papers, her hand shaking as she signed her name. Each stroke of the pen was like a nail sealing shut the coffin of our marriage. When she finished, she looked up at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Please, can we talk about this? About us? There is no us anymore, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. You made sure of that the moment you lied to me, the moment you brought someone else into our lives without a second thought about the consequences. She winced at my words, her fingers clenching tightly around the pen. I felt a brief, fleeting satisfaction at her discomfort, but it passed quickly. This wasn't about hurting her, it was about cutting myself free from the chains of her betrayal. Where am I supposed to go? She asked softly, her voice barely audible. That's up to you, I said. But I want you out by the end of the day. She stood, her movements slow and heavy, like she was carrying the weight of the entire house on her shoulders. As she gathered her things, I could see her looking around, her gaze lingering on the framed photos lining the walls, the knickknacks that told the story of a life that had once seemed so solid. It must have been sinking in that she was losing all of it, that the life she'd taken for granted was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The kids were still at my sister's place, a small mercy that spared them from witnessing their mother's departure. I knew the hardest part would be explaining all of this to them, finding a way to tell them that the family they had known would never be the same. I couldn't even imagine the words yet, but I would find a way when the time came. I owed them that much. Once she had packed her things, she stood by the front door, her suitcase at her feet. She looked at me one last time, her face twisted with regret, her voice pleading. "I'm sorry, for everything. I know that doesn't mean much, but I am." I nodded, barely acknowledging her words. "Goodbye." She lingered for a moment, like she was hoping for some last reprieve. But I stayed silent, and eventually, she turned and walked out, leaving our home and our life behind her. I shut the door, locking it, and took a deep breath, letting the silence settle over the empty house. It was only then, in the quiet aftermath of her departure, that I felt the first pangs of grief. I'd been so focused on getting through the confrontation, on pushing her out of my life, that I hadn't allowed myself to feel the loss. And now, as the reality set in, it hit me like a wave. I sank down onto the couch, the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me until it felt hard to breathe. I stayed there for hours, staring blankly at the walls, reliving every memory, every moment that had led us here. I thought about the early days, the years when we'd been so in love, so certain that nothing could ever come between us. I thought about the plans we'd made, the dreams we'd shared, all of it now in ruins. The anger had sustained me through the betrayal, through the confrontation, but now that it was over, all that was left was emptiness. When I finally moved, it was only because I couldn't bear to sit in that silence any longer. I went to pick up the kids, unsure of what to say, of how to tell them what had happened. On the drive over, my mind raced through possible explanations, but nothing felt right. How could I possibly make them understand? My sister met me at the door, her face etched with concern. She'd known something was wrong, though I hadn't shared the details. I just told her I needed her to keep the kids for a while. She gave me a small nod, her hand resting on my shoulder for a brief moment before she stepped aside, letting me go in to face my children. They greeted me with their usual enthusiasm, their bright faces a painful contrast to the heaviness in my heart. I hugged them tightly, holding on longer than usual, as if I could somehow shield them from the storm that was coming. We sat down together, and I took a deep breath, bracing myself. I kept my voice steady, explaining in the simplest terms that their mom and I were no longer going to be together, that things were going to change, but that I loved them more than anything and would always be there for them. They asked questions, some I could answer, others I couldn't. I felt the weight of their confusion and sadness, each question a reminder of how much they had lost, how much we all had lost. When we got home, I did my best to keep things as normal as possible. We ordered pizza, watched a movie, and for a little while, it almost felt like nothing had changed. But there were moments, quiet glances, a certain hesitation in their voices, that reminded me they were struggling to process everything. They didn't fully understand, but they knew enough to sense the gravity of it all. Over the following days, I settled into a new routine. I focused on the kids, on making sure they felt safe and loved, even if I didn't always have the words to explain what had happened. It was hard, balancing my own grief with their needs, but it gave me purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. I began to clean the house with a certain fervor, as if scrubbing the surfaces could erase the memories of what had happened. I took down photos of us as a family, storing them away, out of sight but not out of mind. It felt strange, like I was erasing parts of my own life, but I knew it was necessary if I wanted to create a fresh start for myself and the kids. In the evenings, after the kids were asleep, I would sit in the quiet, letting myself feel the full weight of what had happened. It was a dark, lonely place, but I knew I had to go through it if I wanted to move on. I'd thought that getting her out of my life would bring peace, but in reality, it was only the beginning of a long, painful journey. Each day, though, the pain lessened a little, the memories faded just enough to let me breathe again. I was slowly reclaiming my life, piece by piece, carving out a new existence that didn't include her. And for the first time, I began to see that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond the betrayal, a life where I could find happiness again. I didn't know what that future looked like yet, but as I looked at my kids, their faces filled with hope and innocence, I realized that I owed it to them, and to myself, to keep going, to find that new beginning, no matter how difficult the journey might be. Months passed, and life gradually began to settle into a new kind of normal. The initial shock of the divorce was fading, replaced by a steady rhythm of work, school routines, and weekend activities with the kids. I'd carved out a new reality, one where I was both a father and a single man, learning to balance responsibility with rediscovering who I was outside of the marriage. Every now and then, I'd feel the old anger bubbling up, but it had dulled with time, now just a quiet memory that reminded me of how far I'd come. One evening, while the kids were at a sleepover, I decided to go through the remaining boxes that I'd stored away after the divorce. There was still a sense of closure that I hadn't found, like pieces of a puzzle that hadn't fully clicked together. I felt ready now to look back without the pain clouding my judgment. I started with a box of photos and mementos, mostly snapshots of our life before things had fallen apart. As I sifted through old birthday cards and family pictures, I came across an envelope tucked between the pages of an old photo album. It was labeled, "For When You Need Me Most." I stared at it, the handwriting unmistakably hers, delicate and looped. My pulse quickened as I held it, feeling a strange sense of dread mixed with curiosity. I thought back, trying to remember when she might have written it, but I came up blank. Had she left this here for me, or was it something forgotten in the chaos of our life together? I hesitated before opening it, my fingers trembling slightly as I slipped the folded paper from the envelope. Her handwriting covered the page, neat and careful, as though she had taken her time with each word. Asterisk, dear you. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong between us. I don't know if it was something big or small, but I want you to know the truth, even if it's too late. I owe you that much. I never stopped loving you. I don't know what happened along the way, but there are things I need to say. Things I couldn't bring myself to tell you face to face. There was someone else, yes. But not in the way you think. It was never about him. Liam was a distraction. Something I fell into when I felt like I was disappearing. I can't explain why I did it. Maybe I was looking for something to bring me back to myself, to feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was selfish, and I see that now. But in the end, it was always you, even when I lost my way. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I hurt you, and nothing can undo that. But I wanted you to know that despite my mistakes, I never stopped loving you. I was lost, yes, but not from you. From myself. Asterisk. I read the words over and over, my mind reeling. She had written this long before the divorce, maybe even before I'd found out about the affair. She'd known, somehow, that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And in her own way, she had tried to explain herself, tried to reach me across the chasm of her own mistakes. But as I turned the page, I realized there was more. Asterisk, I also need you to know one other thing. It's a secret I've kept even from you, and maybe it's one I should have never hidden. But I was scared. Scared of what it would mean for us, for you. Years ago, when we first started our family, I found out something that changed everything for me. Our second child isn't biologically yours. I'd had a brief, stupid mistake before I found out I was pregnant, and I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that we'd be okay. I convinced myself it was a one-time thing and buried it so deep that I almost believed it myself. But as you're reading this, I know there's no hiding it anymore. Our child may not be yours by blood, but you have been the best father I could have ever hoped for. I can't bear to think about the pain this will bring you. All I ask is that you don't let this change how you see them. Please, let them believe in the father you've always been. I'm so sorry. I can't ask for forgiveness. But maybe, someday, you'll understand why I kept it from you. Asterisk. The room spun as I absorbed the words, my vision blurring as the implications sank in. Our second child, the one I had held in my arms, taught to ride a bike, tucked in at night with bedtime stories. Not biologically mine. The realization felt like a knife twisting in my gut, dredging up the raw betrayal I thought I'd buried. For so long, I'd been fighting to reclaim my life, believing that I was the one wronged. And now, this revelation added a new layer, one I couldn't have imagined. The anger surged, hot and consuming, but as quickly as it came, it faded, replaced by something else, a strange, hollow acceptance. This child, regardless of DNA, was mine in every way that mattered. I had raised them, loved them, shared their laughter and their tears. But the betrayal remained. It was a scar that would never truly fade, a reminder of a life that had been built on half-truths and secrets. I sat there for hours, alone in the quiet of the house, the letter clutched in my hands. I thought about all the moments I had spent wondering where things had gone wrong, how I'd missed the signs. And now, with this letter, I realized that maybe I had never known her at all. The next day, I woke up feeling like a different man, one who had finally glimpsed the full truth, even if it was a truth I'd never asked for. I knew I could never tell anyone, not the kids, not even my closest friends. This was a burden I would carry alone, something that would forever color the way I saw my past. But as the days passed, I found a strange kind of peace in it. I had been wronged, yes, but I had also been given a new perspective. I could move forward knowing that I had done right by the kids, by the family we'd built, even if the foundation had been cracked from the start. And in that, I found a small, stubborn kind of hope. The kind of hope that comes from surviving the worst and emerging, not unscathed, but whole enough to keep going. As for her, I knew I would never see her the same way again. She was just another ghost from a life I'd left behind, a stranger I once loved, but who had drifted too far for me to ever reach again. In the end, I chose to leave the letter in the box, hidden away with the remnants of our life together. It was a reminder of a chapter I'd closed, of a story that would never be fully understood. And maybe, that was okay. Because for the first time, I was ready to write a new story, one that was mine alone.